In 1998, New Line Cinema dropped the first Blade film. It met a mixed response from critics, receiving a 54% on Rotten Tomatoes, but was actually complimented by legendary film critic Roger Ebert, who gave it a 3 out of 4 rating. However, it was a big financial hit, making just less than 3 times its budget, which was $45 million, with a $131 million profit worldwide. Naturally, a sequel was released 4 years later, in 2002, with original director Stephen Norrington now returning, and instead being replaced with none other than future Hellboy and Pacific Rim director, and now Oscar winner, Guillermo del Toro. That sequel was a slightly bigger financial success, making $155 million against a $54 million budget, but it was also still not beloved by critics, scoring only a slightly higher 57%, but also receiving a 3.5 out of 4 from Roger Ebert this time. After Blade 2's success, a threequel was dropped in 2004 titled Blade Trinity, and was helmed by the scribe of the first 2 Blade films, as well as feature Batman Begins, Man of Steel, and Batman v Superman scribe David S. Goyer, stepping in for Del Toro after he'd walked away to direct Hellboy. Trinity was the most expensive of the 3, costing $65 million to make, and was also the least successful, making only $128.9 million worldwide. Just a little less than breaking even. While critics previously had mixed reactions to the first 2 films, the pendulum had decidedly swung in a much more negative direction this time, with Rotten Tomatoes giving the movie a 25% fresh rating, and even Roger Ebert giving it only a 1.5 out of 4. 2 years later, Goyer took the franchise to television on Spike TV, now known as Paramount Network. Wesley Snipes, who portrayed the title character in all 3 films, did not return for the series, and so he was recast with rapper Sticky Fingers. It ran from June 28, 2006 to September 13, 2006, and it was cancelled after only 1 season. After that, things were pretty quiet on the Blade front until New Line Cinema's rights to the character lapsed in 2011, and after that rather small blip on the radar, things stayed pretty darn quiet for the next 8 years, until this year. At San Diego Comic-Con, on July 20th, 2-time Oscar winner Mahershala Ali announced that in the near future, he will be joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the Daywalker himself. I actually reviewed the first Blade film for Halloween last year, and I absolutely loved it. And while I've been hot and cold about a lot of MCU films over the years, Mahershala Ali is a genuinely great actor who I think would make a pretty kick-ass Blade, assuming he has a talented director and a good script to work with. And while the news dropped a month ago, so the iron has likely cooled down quite a bit, I still think it'd be fun to remind people of just how good this franchise was with Wesley Snipes as the star and David Goyer as the writer, and how bad it eventually got. Picking up 2 years after the events of the first Blade film, we find our titular hero as he finds his mentor, Whistler, who was assumed to have died by his own hand after having been turned by agents of Deacon Frost. We move back to Blade's compound with Whistler integrating with his protege's new partner, Scud. Things seem like they'll return to business as usual when a pair of vampires slip into the base and duel with Blade. The older of the two calmly explains that they've been fighting in self-defense and didn't come for a fight at all, only to deliver a message on behalf of the vampire collective. A threat to both vampires and humans has emerged, and the vampires need Blade's help in defeating them. Blade accepts their request and is teamed up with a unit called the Bloodback, a team specifically formed for the purpose of hunting and killing him. The mission continues with the threat being revealed to be a vampire named Jared Nomak, who was the son of Demaskinos, the head of one of the vampire families who lead the collective. Demaskinos wanted to create a vampire who was immune to all of the standard vampire weaknesses, but wound up just creating a vampire who fed on other vampires, creatures who are dubbed Reapers. Having written Jared off as a failed experiment, Demaskinos captures Blade after the mission with the help of Reinhardt, the leader of the Blood Pack, and Scud, the latter of whom is revealed to be a familiar, a human servant of the vampires. Demaskinos plans to use Blade's blood to continue experiments to create stronger vampires, but is stopped when Whistler rescues Blade and pumps him up by tossing him into a blood-filled tub inside of Demaskinos' compound. Rejuvenated, Blade kills Scud, Reinhardt, and Nomak, the last of whom had already killed Demaskinos as an act of revenge, returning him into something even worse than a vampire. Demaskinos' daughter Nisa is also killed after having been also bitten by Nomak, but instead of dying by his hand, she allows for herself to be killed by sunlight, rather than become what Nomak became. The film then ends with Blade popping in on another vampire who he'd allowed to live for now at the start of the film, and credits roll. So you want to know how you can tell Guillermo del Toro directed this movie? 3 specific points. The villain this time isn't purely a monster despite having more monstrous physical traits. 2, one of the supporting characters is herself a vampire. And 3, the sheer level of detail of the Reaper's corpse. If there's anything you should know about Guillermo del Toro, it's that he loves his monsters, and he loves to detail the creatures in his movies. And this particular movie is no exception. Well, at the same time, Guillermo does still recognize that this is a movie where the purpose is to watch Wesley Snipes turn vampires to ash, and he doesn't skimp on that. First 5 minutes of this movie, after the prologue, is a really fantastic action sequence, a Blade gunning down and slicing up vampires with his sword, shurikens, and his little string weapon that he used to kill Donald Logue in the first movie. Del Toro also shows off his famous horror chops with some genuinely frightening sequences, like when the Reapers all gang up on Scud while he's inside his van, with ultraviolet floodlights on the roof. And the Reapers are smashing the windshield while Scud is desperately trying to turn the floodlights back on so we can kill these fucking things. There's also the sequence at the start of the film where Jared is taken to presumably give blood, and you think he's just some poor homeless guy being suckered like the man from the club at the start of the first movie. But then Jared turns it around and actually goes to town on the vampires. Remember how scary the assholes from the first movie were? This guy just did to them what they did to everyone who wasn't Blade in the first movie. And while Wesley Snipes as Blade isn't as actively involved in this story as he was in the first movie, he's still just as charismatic as he was before. And I'm really glad that Whistler had more to do this time around. In the first movie, he was mostly just there to give exposition, and had one scene where he played the cavalry to Blade and Dr. Karen, and by bailing them out of a bad situation before he was killed. But here, he actually has a chance to shine his actual personality. Like when Whistler points out to a member of the Blood Pack that they need to move soon because the sun is about to start rising. In turn, the Blood Pack member makes a very colorful threat against Whistler, to which Whistler replies, "I love it when you talk dirty." He's also a much more active presence in the story in general. Not only is he part of the main quest to destroy Jared, not only does he save Blade, but he's also the one who actually destroys all of the samples meant to create future Jareds. But on the other hand, I don't think certain plot threads are as well developed as they ought to be. Scott turning out to be a traitor really does come out of left field. The story with Blade and Nissa's relationship is kind of tossed in and not really developed in any meaningful way. I already said in the first movie that I don't understand attempts to make Blade sympathize with vampires, and while it's done better here than it was with Mama Blade in the first movie, it's still a confusing choice to me personally. And as cliche a complaint as this is, I really do bemoan the fact that a few of these big fights are just CGI models fighting another CGI model that looks like Wesley Snipes. I'm fine with that when it's Superman fighting Zod or Doomsday. If you want to do those fights right, you need to use CGI characters, plain and simple. But an acrobatic sword fight between Blade and some vampires without CGI is entirely possible, especially when Wesley Snipes is well known for being an actual martial artist. And most especially when you show Wesley kicking ass without a ton of CG in between these CGI fights. But that all said, though, Blade 2 was a lot of fun, and despite my quibbles, it's still an extremely entertaining film. So, I'm going to give Blade 2 a 3.5 out of 5. Hey everyone, this is Woodstock from the future. While I was editing the video, I noticed that the CGI in the Blade versus Nyssa and whatever his name is fight, and the CG in the Blade versus Nomak fight, it's actually not as prominent as I thought it was. And to be honest, that actually does increase my appreciation for these fights. And overall, the movie in general, so I'm actually going to bump my grade up a little bit. I still think the CGI in those fights is kind of gratuitous, but it's not as bad as I thought it was, so that bumps the movie up from a 3.5 to just a 4. That's all. Our story starts with Blade running down a pack of vampires in Seattle and sniping all but one of them. The last vampire doesn't take much longer to be taken down, though. And it also doesn't take too long for said vampire to explain that he's not a vampire at all. He's a familiar who just sacrificed himself to help frame Blade for murder. And in turn, Blade's compound is soon raided by the FBI, leading to the Daywalker's arrest and Whistler's second death. Blade soon finds out that the federal office he's being held in is filled with familiars there to kill him. But before Blade can fight his way out, though, he's neutralized with a powerful sedative. But before he can be taken away, though, he's rescued by a pair of young people. A cured vampire named Hannibal King, played by Ryan Reynolds, and Whistler's illegitimate daughter named Abigail, played by Jessica Biel. Hannibal and Abigail are actually part of a group of vampire hunters called the Night Stalkers. Blade is rather unimpressed with the group, but soon has to rely on them when the Vampire Collective revives the one and only Count Dracula. Blade and Dracula, as portrayed by Dominic Purcell, eventually face off and engage in a one-on-one duel, with Dracula actually coming out on top, but being killed anyway when Abigail shoots him with a poisoned arrow. The poison, as it turns out, was actually intended to be a virus developed by the Night Stalkers and was created to destroy all vampires once they infected Dracula with it. But before he dies, Dracula, impressed with Blade's skill as a fighter, offers him a final courtesy by changing his appearance to look like Blade, an ability he's demonstrated throughout the film. The FBI then finds Dracula's corpse and assumes that Blade must be dead. Wesley Snipes reportedly hated Goyer as the choice for a director immediately and wasn't much crazier about the Night Stalkers idea either, feeling that they would be taken away from his spotlight. So he pretty much went full-on diva. He openly showed disdain for Ryan Reynolds on set. He would frequently just chill out in his trailer smoking weed until a scene specifically he had a close-up of him, and often refused to do any of his stunts. There's even a story where Blade was knocked out during his fight with Dracula, and when the character was supposed to wake up, Snipes literally refused to open his eyes, forcing the production to CGI Wesley's eyes over his eyelids for that scene. But while these don't exactly help the movie at all, they're not exactly the only things wrong with it either. The other main issue is the villains. Deacon Frost was a charisma powerhouse with a genuinely interesting conflict with other vampires. Jared Nomak, while not as cool as Frost, no pun intended, had a genuine screen presence and was incredibly powerful, and was intriguing because he was a threat to humans and vampires. Meanwhile, Dominic Purcell, while he's been pretty good in other projects, he was given basically a nothing role here. Instead of relying on the classic Count Dracula tropes, Goyer tried to reinvent him as basically King Arthur meets Cthulhu. But it doesn't really work, and I don't really think it's necessary. I'm reminded of a scene from BoJack Horseman where the main character is workshopping a scene with his friend Ethan for their new sitcom. And for the scene, Ethan has to give a comedic delivery of the line, "That went well." But Ethan ends up saying the line in a really forced and unnatural sounding way. And BoJack explains to Ethan patiently that he's pushing too hard. It's a funny line, he can just trust it. And to me, that feels like what happened here. David, Dracula is scary. You can trust him. You could have trusted him. You didn't need to make him a shape-shifting lizard monster who can make himself look like Lincoln from Prison Break. And the sad thing is, Dracula isn't even the main villain. Parker Posey's Danica Talos is, and save for one scene, she really isn't the best villain ever. She's certainly an effective villain, the plot to frame Blade seems to have been her idea, but she's not especially threatening or intimidating, and she has some really awful dialogue. For instance, there's a bit where Danica has captured Hannibal, and during her interrogation, Hannibal and a vampire character played by Triple H keep tossing around insults involving the word dick. And Danica yells for everyone to stop saying that word because it makes her envious.
And how about everyone here not saying the word dick anymore? It provokes my envy.
Get it? Get it? Because penis envy. Fuck. And putting aside some recent views she's expressed, well, Jessica Biel actually is pretty solid in this role and is just plain very pretty, I find it to be a strange choice to make Abigail a young adult as opposed to someone closer to Blade's age. And moreover, I think it seems like an odd choice to make her Whistler's illegitimate daughter as opposed to his and his wife's child. I think it weakens Whistler's own character retroactively to show that he moved on enough to sleep with another woman after his wife's death. That's not to say you shouldn't move on after your spouse's death. That'd be stupid. That'd be a stupid thing to say. But I always saw Whistler as someone who hunted because he was so damaged by his wife and children's deaths that it consumed him. All that mattered was the mission. I think a better choice would have been to have made Abigail one of the daughters who were caught by vampires when Whistler was a young man, and say that she escaped and that she and dear old dad slew vampires together, but parted ways when it became clear that Whistler wasn't doing this to help people, but to hurt someone else like they hurt him. Maybe mention how isolated he'd become and contrast that with how Abigail now has a whole new family in the Night Stalkers. Hannibal in the film proper actually mentions at one point that it was Abigail who cured him. Why not play that up? Make them less platonic friends of a similar age and more of a student-mentor relationship. Parallel how close they are with how much Blade refuses to give this guy any credit. It's not all bad, though. I really do love Natasha Lyonne as Summerfield, the blind scientist woman, and her last scene is one of the few times Goyer shows off some pretty solid chops with suspense. The scene where Danica threatens to turn Hannibal again, starve him until he absolutely has to feed, then lock him in a room with Summerfield's daughter Zoe and make him beat on her, is a fantastic villain moment for Danica.
You're brave, King. I'll give you that. But underneath all that swagger, I know what you really fear. What would hurt you more than anything else? You don't want to go back to being one of us, do you? I'm gonna bite you again, King. And I'm gonna leave you here while you turn. I'm going to watch you day after day as the thirst keeps building and building. And then, when you can't stand it anymore, I'm gonna bring the little girl in here for you to feed on. Would you like that, King? Would you enjoy taking her life?
And in my opinion, it's not only the best scene of this movie, it might be one of the best scenes from this whole trilogy. And the sword fight between Dracula and Blade is actually pretty darn cool. Overall, this is an extremely subpar movie, but it's far from something offensive or something made in bad taste. It has a handful of semi-redeeming qualities. So, I'm going to give Blade Trinity a 1.5 out of 5. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed these reviews, and if you did, like this video, comment down below if you have any thoughts on either of these films, and subscribe to my channel. I just wrapped up 2 retrospectives about the main Predator series and the Alien vs. Predator duology, so check those out if you feel so inclined. And like I mentioned at the top, I also previously reviewed the first Blade back in October. I've also previously reviewed a lot of other comic book movies like Watchmen, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Justice League, Black Panther, Deadpool 2, Venom, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, Robert Rodriguez's Alita Battle Angel, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, Shazam, Neil Marshall's Hellboy, Aquaman, and Avengers Infinity War. Plus reviews for the original Watchmen comic by Alan Moore, and the video game Marvel Ultimate Alliance, which Marvel and Disney have just charged in a Nintendo exclusive threequel of their own to. When you finish poring over all those old videos, or just get bored and decide to come back to my channel, because why not, you can check out my next review for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Or If you want to wait for something a little less childish, you can stay tuned for my review for Hulu Japan and HBO Asia's television adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, Miss Sherlock. And if you want something a little less weeb, well, first of all, you're being very picky, but if you absolutely insist, then come back for when we discuss some more of the works of David S. Goyer, with the first season of his own television series, Krypton. Till then, I hope you all have a great day. Woodstock, out!